The hum of the fluorescent lights in Building C is a frequency designed to strip mine your will to live. It is 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. You are staring at a Slack notification you do not want to open, running on a triple-shot oat milk latte, and 4 hours of fragmented, anxious sleep. The corporate lie is simple, insidious, and universally accepted by the modern professional. If you are exhausted, you are important. If you are depleted, you are valuable. We have mythologized burnout as a merit badge, transforming a warning sign of systemic failure into a marker of personal dedication. But 2,000 years ago, the architects of the greatest empire in history did not burn out. They operated on a different operating system, an ancient firewall against the very exhaustion that is currently hollowing you out from the inside. They codified their survival into a triad: Frugalitas, the ruthless severing of the non-essential; Disciplina, the governance of the self; and Otium, the sacred, productive rest that sharpened the blade of the mind. You have tried the meditation apps. You have dabbled in quiet quitting. You have sat on the velvet couch of a therapist's office and traced your exhaustion back to your childhood. And you are still waking up tired. Why? Because those are symptom treatments. They are band-aids applied to a hemorrhage. The Romans didn't treat symptoms, they engineered the soul. This is the story of Chloe Davis, a 33-year-old healthcare administrator in Houston, Texas, who had everything the corporate world said would make her happy, and it was destroying her. Houston, Texas. The Texas Medical Center is the largest medical complex on the planet. 52 million square feet of clinical space, generating a relentless, suffocating tidal wave of data, logistics, and human fragility. Chloe Davis sits at her desk on the third floor of the administrative annex. It is 7:14 a.m. Her inbox has 142 unread emails. Her phone vibrates with a phantom tremor against her thigh, a phantom limb sensation occurring even when the device is silent. The fluorescent overheads cast a flat, shadowless glare across the sea of cubicles, bleaching the color from the walls and the faces of her colleagues. The air conditioning is cranked to a meat locker chill, blowing a steady current of recycled, antiseptic-scented air down the back of her neck. This is the friction of her professional life. It is the constant, low-grade hum of unyielding demands. Who is asking for the quarterly compliance report? The chief medical officer. When is it due? Yesterday. Where is the bottleneck? The nursing staff schedules refuse to align with the new billing software. Why does it matter? Because the hospital's operating margins depend on her pivot tables. How does she survive it? By swallowing the tightness in her throat, ignoring the dry sting in her eyes, and clicking reply all. The days bleed into a monotonous montage of whiteboards, dry erase markers that have run dry, and the heavy muted thud of the timestamp machine in the break room. She manages the chaos of life and death from a remove of spreadsheets and policy documents, a bureaucrat of human suffering. She is always accessible, always reacting, always one ping away from a crisis that isn't hers but is somehow her responsibility to solve. The breaking point does not arrive as a cinematic tragedy. It is a micro-collapse. A Wednesday, 2:30 p.m., the quarterly budget review. Chloe is presenting a mitigation strategy for the surgical unit's overtime costs. She has spent 14 hours compiling the data, skipping dinner, sleeping with her laptop on her chest. She is 2 slides deep into the deck. She looks up from her laptop. The VP of Operations is scrolling through his Apple Watch, his face bathed in the blue glow of a text message. The CFO is typing violently on his phone under the table, his brow furrowed at a screen that is not hers. The chief nursing officer is staring blankly at a dying pothos plant in the corner of the conference room. No one is looking at her. No one is listening. The numbers she has sacrificed her sanity to compile are dissolving into the ether of the room. She stops talking, mid-sentence, which is why the Q3 projection requires a shift in silence. She waits, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The CFO finally looks up, his fingers pausing over his screen. Sorry, Chloe, keep going, I'm listening. But he isn't. None of them is. She is a ghost haunting her own career. The realization hits her like a physical blow to the solar plexus. She is entirely invisible. She has run herself ragged for an audience that is looking at its watches. Yet, as she drives home on the I-10, the AC blasting against the Houston humidity, the sun glaring off the windshields of the endless traffic, she doesn't cry. She just tightens her grip on the steering wheel until her knuckles bleach white and repeats the internal lie, the subconscious mantra that has kept her locked in the matrix. If I just work harder, I'll finally feel safe. Walter Vance doesn't live in the static. He exists above it. He is 72, a retired hospital CEO who stepped away at the height of his power to buy a modest, heavily shaded property in the exclusive River Oaks neighborhood. Chloe sought him out through a mentorship program the hospital board tossed at her like a hollow bone. When she walks into his study for their first session, the air is immediately different. It is heavy, grounded. It smells of old paper, oiled leather, and French roast coffee, not the burnt institutional sludge she survives on, but something rich and deliberate. There are no Slack notifications here, no Outlook pings, no phantom vibrations, just the slow, deliberate tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. Vance is a man who seems untouchable. Not because he is arrogant, but because he is entirely contained. He doesn't fidget. He doesn't check his phone. He doesn't scan the room. He just looks at her, his eyes sharp and unclouded by the chronic stress that plagues the executives she knows. He pours her a cup of coffee from a ceramic press, the sound of the liquid heavy and soothing. You look tired, Chloe, he says. It isn't an insult. It isn't a pleasantry. It is a clinical diagnosis. She gives him the rehearsed answer. She talks about the hours, the Q3 reports, the compliance audits, and the epic software migration. She talks around the exhaustion, wrapping it in the jargon of busyness. He listens entirely still, his hands folded over his stomach, until she runs out of corporate buzzwords, and the silence rushes back in to fill the void. He leans forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his eyes locking onto hers with a surgical precision that makes her feel seen for the first time in years. Are you building a career, Chloe, or are you building a cage? The question hangs in the heavy air of the study. It bypasses her intellect and strikes directly at the exhaustion in her bones. She opens her mouth to defend her job, but no words come. Pause for a moment. Look at your own life. Look at the apps, the inboxes, the endless hamster wheel of performative productivity. If your job title were stripped away tomorrow, if the Slack channels were deleted and the email account closed, what remains of your dignitas? For the Roman, dignitas wasn't a business card or a corner office. It was the unshakable foundation of their character, their moral authority, their intrinsic worth that survived the loss of wealth or status. For Chloe, staring at Walter Vance in the quiet of his study, she realizes with a sickening lurch that she has no idea what remains. She has poured every ounce of her life force into the cage, and the cage has eaten it. Walter Vance doesn't offer Chloe a therapy session. He doesn't offer her a breathing exercise or a motivational quote. He offers her a protocol, an ancient one. Tomorrow, he says, his voice low and ironclad, you will wake up at 4 a.m. You will not check your email. You will not look at Slack. You will not turn on a single screen. You will sit in your living room, in the dark, in absolute silence for exactly 30 minutes. You will do nothing. Chloe almost laughs. It sounds absurd. Sit in the dark? I have a compliance report due at 8. If I'm up at 4, I need to be working. I need to get ahead. That, Vance replies, his eyes narrowing, is exactly why you are broken. He introduces her to the Roman concept of Otium. To the modern ear, Otium sounds like idleness, a pejorative term for laziness. But to the Roman senator, Otium was the highest form of productivity. It was the deliberate, strategic withdrawal from the noise of the forum, to cultivate the mind, to read, to reflect, to prepare for the battles of the negocium, the public business. It was not the collapse of binge-watching Netflix after a 12-hour shift. It was sacred, intentional rest. Before she could practice Frugalitas, the ruthless pruning of wasted energy, she had to cultivate the Disciplina to protect her time to think. Let's look at the brain science of what is happening to Chloe and what is likely happening to you. It's called the Cortisol Loop. When you live in the corporate static, the constant pings, the artificial urgencies, the micro-stressors of a demanding boss or a looming deadline, your brain's amygdala perceives a threat. It signals the hypothalamus, triggering the HPA axis, which in turn floods your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. In the ancient world, this was meant to save your life from a predator. A burst of energy, a fight or flight response, followed by a release and a return to baseline. But in the modern office, the predator is your inbox. The threat never leaves. Your cortisol levels never fully recede. You are marinating in a neurochemical bath of chronic stress. Over time, this constant flood of cortisol literally damages the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory and learning, while simultaneously causing the amygdala to become hyperreactive. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, decision-making, and strategic thought, begins to atrophy under the constant assault. Your brain literally loses the capacity to think clearly, so it defaults to autopilot. You answer emails instead of doing deep work. You react instead of acting. You survive instead of leading. You are not tired because you are doing too much. You are tired because your nervous system is trapped in a perpetual state of emergency, burning through your glucose reserves just to maintain a state of high alert. By waking at 4 a.m. to do nothing, Chloe is forcibly breaking the cortisol loop. She is introducing a wedge of disciplina between the stimulus and her response. In that dark living room, her cortisol levels are naturally at their lowest point of the circadian cycle, and by refusing the screen, she refuses the spike. She is reclaiming the neuro-real estate of her own prefrontal cortex, allowing her brain to access the default mode network, DMN, the neurological state that activates during wakeful rest, allowing for creative problem-solving and self-reflection. She is practicing Otium. The next morning, Chloe's alarm goes off at 4 a.m. The Texas night is heavy outside her apartment window, the city a distant, muffled hum. Every instinct screams at her to check her phone. The phantom vibrations are intense, a physical itch in her palm. The anxiety sits in her chest like a stone. What if the night shift had a crisis? What if the CMO emailed about the budget? She forces herself to leave the phone on the nightstand. She walks to the living room. She sits on the couch in the dark. The silence is agonizing. It is not peaceful. It is confrontational. For the first 15 minutes, her mind races, a frantic hamster wheel of spreadsheets, schedules, and unreturned emails. The silence feels like a waste of time, an indulgence she cannot afford. But by minute 20, something shifts. The frantic pace of her thoughts begins to decelerate, like a spinning top losing its momentum. Her breathing slows. The tightness in her chest loosens just a fraction, and for the first time in months, she can hear her own voice. Not the voice of the healthcare administrator, not the voice of the exhausted employee, but the voice of Chloe. It is a quiet voice, but it is there. That day, she goes into the hospital, and something is subtly, profoundly different. The static is still there, the fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the ping of Outlook, but she is observing it from a distance. She is not drowning in it. She has a buffer. When the VP of Operations casually drops a quick request on her desk at 11 a.m., a data pull that would take 4 hours and completely derail her actual priorities, Chloe looks at him, feels the old spike of anxiety, the conditioned reflex to say yes, and simply says, "I can get that to you by Thursday. My priority today is the surgical budget." He blinks, surprised by the boundary, but nods and walks away. It's a small victory, a partial win, but to Chloe, it feels like a breach in the matrix. She protected her time. She applied Frugalitas to her energy. She feels a fleeting, electric sense of power. Maybe Walter Vance is right. Maybe she can engineer her way out of this exhaustion. Maybe the Romans knew something the HR department doesn't. But the corporate empire does not take kindly to rebellion. It does not tolerate boundaries. It demands total surrender. On Thursday afternoon, the corporate storm hits. The hospital system announces a massive, top-down restructuring. The CEO is ousted overnight. Departments are merging. Blood is in the water. And Chloe is called into the corner office of the new interim director, a man whose reputation for weeding out anyone who doesn't bleed for the bottom line is legendary in the Texas Medical Center. He closes the glass door behind her. The blinds are already shut. The air in the room is cold and sterile. "Chloe," he says, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. He isn't looking at her. He is looking at a printed spreadsheet. "I've been looking at your time allocations and your response metrics. Thursday delivery on a same-day request. That's not the pace we operate at here." He slides a single piece of paper across the mahogany desk. A performance improvement plan. A PIP. A corporate death sentence dressed in bureaucratic language. "We need hungry team players. We need people who are all in." Her heart hammers against her ribs. The cortisol loop roars back to life. A tidal wave of neurochemical fear crashing over the fragile piece she built at 4 a.m. The prefrontal cortex she had so carefully reclaimed shuts down instantly, hijacked by the amygdala. The Roman firewall is facing its first true siege and the enemy is already inside the gates. It is 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. The sky over Houston is a bruised, sickly orange, reflecting the relentless glow of the city's refineries and strip malls. Rain lashes against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Chloe's apartment, distorting the lights of the I-10 freeway into smeared, watery streaks. She is sitting on her kitchen floor, her back against the cold stainless steel doors of the refrigerator, staring at the crumpled performance improvement plan on the island granite above her. The paper is a physical weight in the room. She had signed it. Of course she had signed it. When the interim director slid it across the mahogany desk, the ancient, reptilian part of her brain had screamed in terror, and the modern corporate conditioning had taken over. Comply, appease, survive. She had nodded, forced a tight, plastic smile, and agreed to align her priorities with the new leadership's vision. Now, in the quiet of her apartment, the shame is a suffocating bile in the back of her throat. The Roman system, the Otium, the Disciplina, had lasted exactly 3 days. It had shattered upon first contact with the reality of corporate power. She wants to quit. Not the job necessarily, but the fight. She wants to go back to being the Chloe who said yes, who swallowed her pride, who worked the weekend to make the VP happy, who got the tepid, patronizing pat on the back. It was exhausting, but it was familiar. It was the exhaustion of the compliant, the safety of the cage. She reaches for her phone, her thumb hovering over Walter Vance's contact. She doesn't want wisdom. She wants absolution. She wants him to tell her it's okay to retreat, that the system was too big, that the modern corporate leviathan cannot be beaten by ancient philosophy. He answers on the second ring. His voice is gravel and oak. "Chloe, I can't do it," she whispers, the sound barely audible over the drumming rain. "I signed the PIP. I said yes to everything. I'm going back to the way it was. It's too hard. The system is too hard. I just want to be left alone. I just want to stop fighting." There is a long, heavy silence on the line. When Vance speaks, there is no pity in his voice. There is no soft therapeutic comfort. There is only cold, unyielding iron. The Roman way was never about feeling better, Chloe. It was never about comfort. If you want comfort, stay in the cage. They will feed you, and they will pat your head, and they will shear your wool until there is nothing left. Frugalitas, Disciplina, Otium, these are not tools for your comfort. They are tools for your survival. They make you harder to break. I am broken. she chokes out. No, he corrects, his voice sharp as a centurion's command. You are tired. There is a difference. A legionnaire marching in the rain with 40 pounds of armor is tired. A slave carrying the legionnaire's bags is also tired. One suffers for one's own dignitas. The other suffers for his master's. You are carrying their bags, Chloe. The moment you decided to put the bag down, they handed you a pip. It's not a tragedy, it's a test. The question is not whether it is hard. The question is, whose exhaustion are you willing to endure? He hangs up, the line goes dead. Chloe stares at the dark screen of her phone. The rain keeps falling. The static is creeping back in. But beneath it, a new frequency emerges. The steady, rhythmic pulse of her own heartbeat. She doesn't get off the kitchen floor for another hour. But when she does not open her laptop to prep for tomorrow's meeting. She goes to bed. It is 2 p.m. on the following Tuesday. The war room. A glass-enclosed conference room in the center of the administrative annex, designed for maximum visibility and maximum psychological pressure. The interim director, a man named Harding, is pacing behind the head of the table. He's a shark, restless and hungry. His sleeves rolled up to reveal the crisp, white cuffs of his custom shirt. The air in the room is thick with the sharp, chemical scent of dry erase marker fumes and the stale, bitter dregs of catered Panera coffee that has been sitting on the hot plate since 8 a.m. The blinds are drawn halfway, casting harsh, diagonal slashes of Texas sunlight across the mahogany table, slicing the room into zones of blinding light and deep shadow. The topic is the surgical unit's overtime costs, a 5-alarm fire, according to Harding. He is looking for a sacrifice. He is looking for someone to blame. He is looking for a reaction. The other administrators sit frozen, their shoulders hunched up around their ears, their eyes darting nervously between Harding and their notepads. They are waiting for the usual script. They are waiting for Chloe Davis, the perennial people-pleaser, to jump on the grenade, to offer a frantic, apologetic solution that will absorb the director's rage and make the problem go away. Harding stops pacing. He leans over the table, his knuckles pressing into the wood, his eyes locking onto Chloe. Davis, he barks, his voice slicing through the tense silence. Your compliance numbers are lagging. Your Q3 mitigation strategy is a joke. Tell me why I shouldn't just roll your department into ops and save the hospital $100,000 in overhead. Every eye in the room snaps to her. The fluorescent lights hum a high, anxious whine. The phantom vibrations in Chloe's pocket intensify. The old script begins to run in her mind. Apologize, deflect, offer a compromise. Tell him you'll work the weekend. Make him feel powerful. She can feel the words rising in her throat, the desperate, servile urge to soothe the predator. But she doesn't. She applies Disciplina. She forces a wedge of silence between the stimulus and her response. She imagines herself sitting in the dark of her living room at 4 a.m. She anchors herself to the Frugalitas, the ruthless conservation of her energy. She does not owe this man her panic. She does not owe this room her dignity. Chloe leans back in her chair. She uncrosses her legs. She places her hands flat on the table, completely still. She does not break eye contact with Harding, but her gaze is not defiant. It is simply indifferent. She is observing him as if he were a spreadsheet error, a minor data anomaly, not a threat to her existence. The physical sensation of withholding the need for validation is excruciating. It is like holding back a sneeze, like releasing a clutch on a manual transmission but refusing to press the gas. Her chest is tight. A bead of sweat traces a cold line down her spine. Her ego screams at her to speak, to fill the void, to seek the dopamine hit of being the problem solver. But she holds the line. 5 seconds pass. 10 seconds. The silence in the glass room becomes a physical force, pressing against the eardrums of everyone present. Harding's glare falters. He shifts his weight. The absence of her submission has disrupted his power play. He expected a fight or a surrender. He did not expect a wall. Finally, Chloe speaks. Her voice is low, measured, and entirely stripped of apology. The Q3 numbers reflect the new billing software's learning curve, as documented in my September 12th memo. The solution is a targeted training sprint which I have already outlined. If you'd like to review the memo, I can resend it. Otherwise, I'm moving on to the supply chain logistics. She looks down at her own notepad. She clicks her pen. She moves to the next agenda item. The meeting, hijacked by her silence, reluctantly follows her lead. From a neuropsychological perspective, what Chloe just did in that room was not merely an act of professional boundary setting. It was a literal act of neurogenesis. Every time you face a corporate fire, a toxic email, a public humiliation, an unreasonable demand, and you suppress your conditioned panic response, you are casting an identity vote. You are physically rewiring your amygdala. The brain operates on a use it or lose it principle. When you chronically react to stress with appeasement, you thicken the myelin sheath on the neural pathway that says, threat, submit. That pathway becomes a superhighway. But when you force a pause, when you apply disciplina and choose not to react, you weaken that synapse. You starve the superhighway of its neurochemical fuel. Simultaneously, you begin to forge a new pathway, one that says, threat, observe, and act with authority. The more Chloe chooses the Roman system, the more she practices Frugalitas with her emotional energy, the thicker and faster this new neural pathway becomes. She is no longer just acting like a woman with dignitas. Her brain is physically reshaping itself to become one. She is trading the exhausted, hyper-reactive brain of a subordinate for the calm, high-capacity brain of a sovereign. 6 weeks later, the dust from the restructuring has settled, but the smell of ozone lingers. Chloe is sitting at her desk. Her inbox is manageable. Her posture is loose, upright, unburdened by the chronic hunch of the people-pleaser. The 4 a.m. Otium is no longer a struggle. It is a fortress. She has pruned her commitments with the ruthless shears of Frugalitas, dropping non-essential committees and delegating low-impact tasks. She operates with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. Harding intercepts her in the hallway. He is smiling. It is not a warm smile. It is the smile of a man who has realized he cannot break a horse, so he decides to buy it. "Davis," he says, falling into step beside her. The heavy, rhythmic click of their shoes on the polished terrazzo floor echoes through the corridor. "I'll be honest, I didn't think you had it in you. But you've shown real grit these last few weeks. The board noticed. I noticed." He stops by the elevator bank. He reaches into the inner pocket of his tailored blazer and pulls out a single, cream-colored envelope embossed with the hospital system's gold foil logo. He holds it out to her. "We're creating a new role, Director of Strategic Operations. It's a VP track position, corner office on the 5th floor. A 40% raise, stock options, and a discretionary budget. You're the obvious choice." Chloe takes the envelope. The paper is heavy and expensive. It is a beautiful, glittering key to a larger, more elaborate cage. She opens it, scanning the formal offer letter. The title is impressive. The salary is life-changing. Then she reads the fine print, the expectations, the travel schedule, the on-call 24/7 clause, the requirement to oversee 3 additional struggling departments. It is a job designed to consume every waking hour, to obliterate her 4 a.m. silence, to shatter her Otium, and to demand total, unquestioning allegiance to the Harding Doctrine. It is the ultimate temptation, the golden handcuff. It is the exact reward the corporate matrix dangles in front of the exhausted worker. Just give up your soul, and all this security can be yours. The old Chloe, the ghost of 6 weeks ago, screams from the depths of her psyche. "Take it. Are you crazy? You're 33. You'll never get an offer like this again. Take the money, take the title, endure the burnout." The cortisol loop flares, a desperate familiar heat in her chest. But the new neural pathway is faster now. She imagines the heavy oiled leather of Walter Vance's study. She feels the cool, dark silence of her living room at dawn. She looks at the crisp, white cuffs of Harding's shirt, at the hungry, possessive glint in his eye. He is not offering her a promotion, he is buying her obedience. She looks at the contract, then back at Harding. The quiet choice is made in the space of a heartbeat. "I appreciate the consideration, Harding," she says, her voice completely flat, devoid of the eager gratitude he expects. "But I'm not going to accept. My bandwidth is fully optimized for my current role, and I won't compromise my effectiveness by over-leveraging my time." Harding's smile freezes. The mask slips for a fraction of a second, revealing the raw, baffled anger beneath. He doesn't understand. A 20% raise, a corner office, these are the only currencies he knows. To refuse them is an alien language. "Think carefully, Davis. This is a one-time offer. You're turning down the fast track." "I am," she replies, handing the envelope back to him. "I'm choosing the real war." She walks past him toward the elevator. Her heart is pounding, but it is not the sickening thud of anxiety. It is the deep, resonant drum of dignitas. She has chosen her own exhaustion over his. She has chosen the system over the status. 6 months later, the administrative annex of the Texas Medical Center. The static is still there. It will always be there. The fluorescent lights still cast their flat, shadowless glare over the cubicles. The overhead speaker still crackles with the same monotone pages. The HVAC still blows its meat locker chill down the back of every neck. But something is fundamentally, irreversibly different. Chloe Davis walks through the bullpen. She is not rushing. She is not hunched. She does not carry the frantic, vibrating energy of the people-pleaser. She moves with a deliberate, unhurried economy. She is stone and flame, unmoving, unshakable, anchored to her disciplina, yet burning with a quiet, intense purpose behind her eyes. She has applied Frugalitas to her career, stripping away the vanity projects and the performative busyness, leaving only the core of her actual value. She has protected her Otium with the ferocity of a Roman sentinel, knowing that the silence of the early morning is the forge where her strategic mind is tempered. She sits at her desk. She takes a sip of black coffee, not the desperate, sugary fuel of the corporate drone, but a deliberate ritual. She opens her laptop. She handles the crises of the hospital with a calm, terrifying efficiency, her prefrontal cortex fully online, her amygdala tamed. When Harding walks by, his jaw tight, she does not look up. She does not seek his approval. She is no longer a subordinate waiting for a pat on the head. She is a sovereign operating within the empire, but not owned by it. She has built something the corporate matrix cannot take away. A self that is harder to break. Let's be direct. You didn't click this video to watch a story about a healthcare administrator in Houston. You clicked it because you are tired. You clicked it because the static is deafening, the cage is closing in, and the golden handcuffs are tightening around your wrists. You clicked it because you are exhausted from performing a version of yourself that shrinks every time a manager frowns or an email pings. The Roman system is open. The blueprint is right here. Frugalitas to cut the waste, Disciplina to hold the line, and Otium to sharpen your mind in the silence. The first step out of the cage isn't a new job. It isn't a transfer to a different department. It isn't another meditation app. The first step is a new mindset. It is the decision to stop carrying their bags and to start building your dignitas. It is the choice to be harder to break. In the comments below, tell me, what is the one corporate rule, the unspoken expectation of constant availability, the glorification of overwork, the compulsion to reply in 5 seconds, that you are ready to break? Declare it, write it down, cast your first identity vote. The empire of your mind is waiting.